Thank you for joining us today. As you complete your first term in Congress, I'd like to start by discussing why 3rd District voters should send you back for another term. Is there a piece of legislation that has passed Congress that you can point to and take credit for to the 3rd District voters?
Well, most importantly, I think the number one thing I did is I did what I said I was going to do. It was about fiscal discipline, limited government, accountability, and a strong national defense. I cast over 1,000 votes, and by and large, I think if the voters went back and looked at those votes, they would reflect the values and the opinions of the 3rd District. You're never going to appease everybody, but I did what I said I was going to do. As far as specific pieces of legislation, we passed an important piece for MAGNA, which is a $12 million water restoration project. The Department of Defense had created a mess there. Locals are paying for about $50 million, but there is a federal nexus here, and the reason that we chiefly sponsored this bill is to allow $12 million to come to MAGNA to help with that cleanup. We have a hydroelectric facility in Utah County that is partly owned by the federal government. Jim Matheson and I, in a bipartisan way, sponsored a piece of legislation for $161 million of loan forgiveness to allow this project to move forward, of offering energy to primarily the southern part of Utah County. But we did it without earmarks. We did it the right way. We brought it to the subcommittee. We brought it to the committee. We had hearings on this. It brought it to the floor of the House. There was no opposition, and it passed. And now it's sitting and waiting for action in the Senate. And then finally, one of the first pieces of legislation I passed was a limitation on the whole body imaging machines that you see at the airport. I just feel like these are an invasion of privacy. These things look at you naked. It may be as a secondary screening device, but for the 2.2 million air passengers every day, it seemed like a little bit too much of an intrusive way to try to secure an airplane. And 310 members in a very bipartisan way, Democrats and Republicans, 310 members of the House voted with me in passing that bill out of the House, and again, still waiting for action in the Senate.
You're on record as strongly against earmarks in the appropriations process. What do you say to critics who are upset because your opposition means that you're not seeking federal funds for projects that could benefit your constituents? Help us differentiate between the appropriations process and inappropriate earmarks, as you've called them.
Well, we're $13 trillion in debt. We're paying $500 to $600 million a day in interest. Clearly, the appropriations process of old is not working. Now, one of the small factors that is how the process by which these projects are funded, one of the mechanisms has been earmarks, but I think it's very out of control. So we set out to change the way we do business. I didn't come here to try to sustain the status quo. I want to change the way we do business in Washington, D.C. So we had an open and transparent process, 2 months of public input. Mayor Billings in Provo was a key aspect of that. He offered some very good input, and we changed it. We said, for instance, there must be a federal nexus in order to justify the expenditure from the federal government. We had one of our own senators put in an earmark for a $750,000 parking lot in Provo, Utah. Well, maybe that sounds good to the people of Provo, but there's no federal nexus. There's no federal justification to try to move shoppers from one mall to another mall. And so I said, no, I'd be opposed to that. That gives me a little bit more authority then to go back to a real-life example of Sarasota, Florida. Was asking for a $10 million appropriation for sand restorations on the beaches of Sarasota. The Utahns shouldn't have to pay for the sand restoration, but the people of Sarasota shouldn't have to pay for our parking lots. So there needs to be a federal nexus. We got rid of the idea and the notion that any of these earmarks would go to private entities. These should be for nonprofit or government agencies. To, again, try to create a filter to say, hey, look, Utahns pay the taxes. We should be getting a benefit, but we can't be all things to all people. We're going to have to limit what we fund and how we fund it. And the process by which you do that needs to be open, needs to be transparent, there needs to be hearings, there needs to be the light of day. It's the best disinfectant. Allow the light of day to come down there, and you'll see most of these projects probably scatter, just like cockroaches, because they don't want the light of day. And we did, the projects that I talked about before, we did it with openness and transparency. We did it through regular order, and consequently, we got them passed.
Some experts are predicting that Republicans will win control of the House of Representatives in November. Assuming that happens and assuming that you're reelected, who will you support for Speaker of the House and why?
Well, I'll support the Republican nominee. I want to fire Nancy Pelosi. That's job number one. Whether that ends up being John Boehner or Eric Cantor, I feel comfortable with both gentlemen. I don't agree with them on all the issues, But in terms of leadership, they've been very good to me. I was named a ranking member as a freshman, which means it gave me great seniority right off the bat. Seniority is not, by the way, just all generated by years of service. It's often appointed or an elected position. But they were both very good to me. I think it's important that this country changes direction, and I think most people, certainly in the 3rd District, want to fire Nancy Pelosi.
Why should Utah voters care about your service on the subcommittee on federal workforce, post office, and the District of Columbia?
The Oversight Committee has jurisdiction on everything. I mean, we dealt from everything with the Bank of America merger with Merrill Lynch to the TARP to the stimulus funding. If you're in the majority, you have subpoena power and you have oversight over the entire federal government. The subcommittee that I'd be involved with is the entire federal workforce, the post office, and Washington, D.C. And with over 2 million federal workers and all the money and benefits that we throw out there, our federal payroll, for instance, is about $447 billion. A very large chunk of the nearly $3.5 to $4 trillion that we spend every year. Like I said, nearly $447 billion of that expenditure goes to this federal workforce. So to be the lead Republican in the majority would, I think, allow me to accomplish a lot of things and certainly have a lot of oversight over the Obama administration.
Given your interest in earmark reform, wouldn't it make more sense to be over in the Appropriations Committee instead?
Well, there are lots of committees that really interest me. I'm also on Natural Resources. I'm not an attorney, but I'm on Judiciary. They deal with a lot of issues. What I have come to find as a freshman member of Congress is that you're not just pigeonholed into one particular committee. You can get involved in any way, shape, or form that you want in other committees and other pieces of legislation. And certainly we've done that. I sponsored, personally, or sponsored or co-sponsored more than 300 pieces of legislation. They weren't all about the federal workforce. A lot of them dealt with the way we're spending money. A lot of them dealt with the natural lands that we're dealing with. So we will still, first and foremost, work to fight back our unbelievable debt and deficit spending. No doubt about it. That's right at the top of my concerns. But federal workforce was a big part of that money.
We've heard a lot of talk in this election cycle about the Tea Party movement. Are you part of the Tea Party movement? And if so, what does that mean?
Well, look, I'm a proud Republican, first and foremost. I represent Utah to Washington, not Washington to Utah. But as far as the Tea Party, yeah, I guess I consider myself a Tea Party activist. And to me, that means somebody who's engaged and involved in wanting to get up out of their seat and be part of the solution rather than part of the problem. The Tea Party is really a grassroots organization saying, hey, we want to change the way we're going in America. And in Utah alone, we have at least 9 different Tea Party organizations. So, yeah, I consider myself an active Tea Party member.
In light of your warm feelings toward the Tea Party, why haven't you aligned yourself with this group of members of Congress that have formed the Tea Party caucus?
Well, some of the members of Congress decided to form a Tea Party caucus, and I refused to do so because I think that goes against the very grain of which they started, the very genesis of what the Tea Party really actually is. If you try to put a figurehead or structure around the Tea Party, you're going to lose the very essence of the Tea Party. Tea Party doesn't need Washington, D.C. direction. The Tea Party is grassroots organizations throughout the United States of America rising up and participating in their government. That's something we should be applauding, not trying to control by some members in Washington, D.C. So,
is the Tea Party a positive development for the Republican Party? You have some candidates that have been nominated this year that may lose their elections in November and lead to fewer Republican seats.
I think it's generally positive. We need more people in this country getting involved, and the Tea Party represents people who haven't maybe necessarily been involved in day-to-day politics, but they are concerned about the direction of their country. They want to be part of the solution as opposed to part of the problem. They actually want to be involved and engaged. They're concerned about our Constitution, about the overreaching size and scope of government. These are all issues that I applaud. So I'm not going to agree with each and every issue with every person that's in the Tea Party or any one faction that is after something else. But I encourage and applaud in the full political spectrum people getting involved in their government in a peaceful way. That is the American way. We should be applauding that, not trying to suppress it.
In the past, you've spoken out against a timetable for withdrawing troops from Iraq, saying that we should withdraw but only at the right time. In light of events in Afghanistan during the past year, what is your position on President Obama's surge of troops to Afghanistan? How long should we keep troops there? And is the standard the same for Afghanistan as for Iraq?
Well, I'm concerned about the way we're moving in Afghanistan. I think the president has failed to define success. If you ask yourself, what is success in Afghanistan? Look, we've been there. It's the longest war in the history of the United States. We've been there for over 9 years. But I would also argue that we have been highly successful. The two key metrics for me is that I've read through the national intelligence estimates and are now public information. One is there are less than 100 al-Qaeda within the entire country of Afghanistan. 30+ million people, we're talking about less than 100 al-Qaeda, which usually shocks people. Is that really true? And I've told my colleagues, if it's not, show me information. But that is the metric, and that is the reality of our national intelligence estimate. The second metric that I think is important is the intelligence experts tell us that while the Taliban is clearly a bad group of people, doing a lot of harmful things to many people, a lot of thugs there, they pose no clear and present danger to the United States of America, nor do they pose a clear and present danger to the current Afghan government. So will we need Ranger teams and SEAL teams to be able to act upon some actionable intelligence, whether it's human or electronic? Absolutely. And let's go take out those threats as they pose themselves. But as we fight the global war on terror, it's not going to be confined to just Afghanistan. It's going to be in Somalia and the Arabian Peninsula and Ethiopia. I mean, we're going to have to fight this fight all across the globe. What I'm concerned about what the president's doing in committing 100,000 troops on the ground is, what is success? And is that truly going to solve the problem? And when the president is going to put troops, boots on the ground, you better darn well go with everything you have, because our military can do anything. They are a killing machine. But you got to cut them loose to do what they do best. But these politically correct wars, they're lost wars. And as I talk to the troops, our National Guard and the other troops that are there, I'm telling you, the rules of engagement are not the way you fight a fight. You go in there to win. And that's the best way to bring our people home safe.
We've had some recent changes in the rules of engagement. Are you satisfied now with the progress that we're making in Afghanistan given the surge in troops and these changes that have been made?
That is a positive direction. When General Petraeus took over, one of the very first things he did was tweaked the rules of engagement. I still don't think they are where they're supposed to be. And look, as a member of Congress, that is our role and responsibility to have oversight. We're not there to just be the lapdog for the president. We're supposed to be the check and the balance and to challenge the president on these types of things. I want to win. I want to make sure that Iran doesn't get a nuclear weapon. I want to fight their national debt, which is a real national security threat. And we got to win the global war on terror. We have to go take out these terrorist cells around the globe. But let's not kid ourselves. We have more al-Qaeda in Guantanamo Bay than anywhere else in the world. We know where they are. We have more al-Qaeda in Pakistan, but we only have less than 250 official advisors in Pakistan. And we're going to send 100,000 troops into Afghanistan, where intelligence estimates are that there are less than 100 al-Qaeda. I'm afraid that we're engaged in the business of nation building. But let's also give credit to the troops. We've been there for 9 years. And so when I suggest to the president that we actually pull back the troops, if you're not going to let them do what they're supposed to do, then pull them back. Some people say, oh, that's cut and run. That's not cut and run. We've been there. That's the longest war in the history of the United States of America. And it's an awful, difficult situation. 80% plus of the country has no electricity. I mean, it's a very, very difficult situation. But I don't think troops on the ground trying to patrol each neighborhood is necessarily something we can afford to do, something we should be doing, or something that will be effective. And it goes back to my original premise, Mr. President, what is success? I don't think we've defined that in this country.